Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. All right, so we have a lot of big news today, and I want to start with the news about Julian Assange. He has won the right to appeal on the grounds of the First Amendment. So this article is from Consortium News. I was very early Monday morning here in the U.S. that they made the ruling over there in London that he will get a chance to appeal the extradition. So this is good news. At the same time, this means he's going to continue to languish away in Belmarsh prison in London, where he's been held for over 5 years on no charges. So there's that, and it's not clear when this appeal will actually start. But I'm going to read from Joe Lauria's article here. I believe he was over there in London covering this. The High Court in London on Monday granted Julian Assange the right to appeal the order to extradite him to the United States on the ground that the U.S. did not satisfy the court that it would allow Assange a First Amendment defense in a U.S. court. So Stella Assange, Julian Assange's wife, told reporters outside the court building, quote, "We spent a lot of time listening to the U.S. putting lipstick on a pig, but the judges didn't buy it. As a family, we are relieved, but how long can this go on? The United States should read the situation and drop this case now," end quote. So Assange has been imprisoned in London's notorious Belmarsh prison for more than 5 years on remand pending the outcome of his extradition. He must now spend an untold number of more months in the maximum security prison awaiting the start of his appeal. And of course, his health is he's in very bad condition health-wise. So in that sense, it was a bitter victory for Assange. He gets to stay in prison another year or more. Joe Biden doesn't have to worry about a journalist showing up in chains in Alexandria, Virginia during a presidential election campaign. And of course, Assange could lose his appeal and arrive in the U.S. at a more opportune time for Biden. So this is a very good point that politically it would not have been good for Biden, even though he wants to put Assange away, for him to do this before the election. The optics of that, of him trying to lock a journalist away for life for doing journalism, would not be good for him. And I think a lot more attention would be put on the case if he was in the U.S. So essentially, just a quick background on what happened here. So Assange, was trying to appeal. The court said, okay, you have basically two grounds to appeal on. That the U.S. has to give assurances that you won't give the death penalty, and also give assurances that you'll have the First Amendment protection, even though you're a foreign citizen. He's an Australian citizen, and the U.S. gave assurances, and apparently they accepted the death penalty assurances, but not the First Amendment rights assurances that the U.S. gave. So that's what he can now appeal it on the First Amendment right. So hopefully this works. And again, ideally the U.S. is going to drop this and hopefully more pressure comes from Australia to get them to just drop it. We need more pressure from inside the U.S. It's our job to, I think, call our representatives and senators about this and bother them, tell them to support the resolution that calls for the U.S. to drop the charges. So like Lauria says in the article, it is kind of a bitter victory for Assange and for his family and for his supporters and for us, the people who, if he is extradited to the U.S. and convicted for doing journalism, for publishing material that the government didn't want him to publish, it would set a very bad precedent for press freedom and in this country and around the whole world, because Assange, he's not even an American, he's an Australian citizen. All right, so the next story here, that article is not at the top of the page. It was at the top of the page all day Monday, but we moved it down because it was up all day. But anyway, to get into the news, the other big story, which I'm hopping around the page today because this was up all day as well, is the ICC, the International Criminal Court, seeks warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders. So on Monday, the International Criminal Court announced that it was seeking arrest warrants for senior Israeli and Hamas leaders for war crimes and crimes against humanity related to the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel and the relentless Israeli bombing campaign and starvation blockade on Gaza that has followed. So Karim Khan, who's the ICC's chief prosecutor, said that his office was seeking warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. In a statement, Khan alleged the Israeli leaders were responsible for the following crimes: starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health contrary or cruel treatment as a war crime, willful killing or murder as a war crime, intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population as a war crime, extermination and or murder, including in the context of deaths caused by starvation as a crime against humanity, persecution as a crime against humanity, other inhumane acts as a crime against humanity. So Khan said, quote, "We submit that the crimes against humanity charged were committed as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the Palestinian civilian population pursuant to state policy. These crimes, in our assessment, continue to this day," end quote. So this comes despite the pressure from the U.S. for them not to issue these arrest warrants. The Biden administration has made its opposition very clear to what the ICC has done here, despite supporting the ICC against Putin just last year. Really shows the hypocrisy. The so-called rules-based order that they're always preaching is really just the U.S.-led. The U.S. gets to pick and choose the rules. So anyway, Biden released a statement calling this outrageous. He said, quote, "Let me be clear, whatever this prosecutor might imply, there is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. We will always stand with Israel against threats to its security," end quote. So the U.S., I just mentioned that the U.S. could potentially take extreme action against the ICC if it does successfully arrest an Israeli official, although that is likely not going to happen. They don't have a police force, and I doubt Netanyahu would go to a country that he might think would send him to The Hague. But anyway, it's important context to understand the U.S.'s history with the ICC. In 2002, George W. Bush signed a bill into law that's nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act that allows the U.S. to use all means necessary to release any U.S. or allied personnel being detained or imprisoned by the ICC or at the request of the ICC. So the ICC's charges against Netanyahu and Gallant, of course, implicate President Biden and other U.S. officials since they have provided so much military support and diplomatic cover for the Israeli campaign in Gaza. So in his response to the ICC, Netanyahu, of course, accused Khan of being anti-Semitic. He said that he will take his place among the greatest anti-Semites in modern times. Netanyahu said, quote, "I reject with disgust the prosecutor's comparison between democratic Israel and the mass murderers of Hamas. This is a complete distortion of reality. This is exactly what the new anti-Semitism looks like," end quote. So I just put in the latest numbers from Gaza's health ministry in here. They say at least 35,562 Palestinians have been killed by Israel since October 7th, a total that does not include the thousands who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. And the Palestinian Red Crescent estimates that over 15,000 children have been killed. So you see them saying that they're making an equivalence between Israel and Hamas, but the warrants for Hamas are for different things. It's mostly related to, the attack on southern Israel, but it's mostly related to the hostages. So he's also seeking warrants for 3 Hamas leaders, so only 2 Israeli leaders, but 3 Hamas leaders, including Yahya Sinwar, who's the head of Hamas in Gaza, Mohammed Diab Ibrahim al-Masri, better known as Deif. He's the leader of Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qasim's brigade, and also Ismail Haniyeh, who is the leader of Hamas's political bureau based in Qatar. In his statement, Khan alleged the Hamas leaders were responsible for the killing of hundreds of Israeli civilians in the following crimes: extermination, murder, taking hostages, rape, and other acts of sexual violence in context of the captivity. So it's interesting if you read his statement. There's all these claims about all this sexual violence during the attacks on southern Israel, but it seems to be that they're just using the allegations of the hostages being, experiencing sexual violence or something. Also, torture as a crime against humanity, other inhumane acts in the context of captivity, cruel treatment as a war crime in the context of captivity, outrages upon personal dignity as a war crime in the context of captivity. So it's mostly about the hostages. And just the numbers from the October 7th attack, a total of 1,139 people were killed, including 695 Israeli civilians, 36 children, 373 security forces, and 71 foreigners. Some of the Israeli civilians were killed by the Israeli military in response to the Hamas attack. They ordered the Hannibal Directive, but it's unclear how many. I really don't know the scale of that. So this is big news here, and of course the U.S. is rejecting this. And again, it just really shows the hypocrisy with Russia. And this is on top of the ICJ's genocide case. So you have the two world courts going after Israel, and of course the U.S. is totally implicated in all of this. All right, so the next story here, Israel tells the U.S. that it will escalate in Rafah. So Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant made clear to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in a meeting in Israel on Monday that Israel will escalate in Rafah despite the White House's supposed objection to a major military operation in the city. So Gallant told Sullivan, quote, "We are committed to broadening the ground operation in Rafah to the end of dismantling Hamas and recovering the hostages," end quote. So you have Sullivan over there saying that, I repeated, President Biden's stance on the situation in Rafah. We don't want it to escalate too much, but Israel keeps escalating, and you have Gallant saying, fresh off of his warrant being issued, saying that, yeah, we are going to escalate. And we've seen him do this with Blinken and Sullivan. Whenever they go over there, the things that the U.S. is warning about, Gallant always says, no, we're going to do that. Don't worry about it. And there's never any consequences. So the UN estimates that over 800,000 civilians out of the 1.4 million who were sheltering in Rafah have already evacuated, and aid groups are warning that the places they are going lack water supplies and other basic necessities. And the U.S. claimed that it was opposed to Israel launching an operation with Rafah without a clear plan for the civilians, yet now more than half of them have evacuated with no plan. It's not clear where most of them are going. But they continue, still no consequences for Israel, despite that warning from Biden. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. is focused on hunting down Sinwar. So this article is from the Middle East Eye, and I've seen this reported by other outlets that the U.S. right now is focused on trying to track down Hamas's Gaza chief, Yahya Sinwar, amid a new push by the White House to help Israel declare total victory so it can bring an end to the war on Gaza, U.S. officials have told Middle East Eye. So these are U.S. officials, U.S. sources speaking to Middle East Eye. And again, I've seen this reported by other outlets. It does seem like the U.S. Is trying to get intelligence on where Sinwar is, and hoping that if they kill, if he's killed or captured, then Netanyahu can declare some sort of victory and wrap this thing up. At the same time, you have Netanyahu and all of his officials not sounding like they want to wrap things up anytime soon. But this seems to be the thinking of the U.S. And these officials say some interesting things. So everybody has been assuming that he's down in the tunnels somewhere. But now the Biden administration is exploring possibilities that he might have fled to Egypt, or that he might have escaped even to Lebanon or Syria. They're thinking that might be a possibility. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky remains in power after his term expires. So Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's term expired on Monday, but he will remain in power since presidential elections scheduled in March were canceled due to martial law that has been imposed since Russia invaded in February 2022. So while the U.S. has framed this proxy war in Ukraine as a battle for democracy, the U.S. has also backed Zelensky's decision not to hold elections. I covered this last week that Blinken went over to Ukraine and gave this speech where he basically justified Ukraine canceling or delaying elections. This is kind of a rewrite of that story. I thought it was important to point out that May 20th, Monday, was the end of Zelensky's term. And of course, Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials say, hey, our constitution forbids elections during martial law. But you had Zelensky, of all people, Lindsey Graham was over there last year and said, hey, you guys should have elections. And Zelensky said, well, if you give us enough money, we could do it. So he did open up the possibility, but the U.S. ultimately did not pressure him enough to do it. And they're, even though this is a big battle for democracy, no elections, and Zelensky stays in power indefinitely to continue this war. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine wants to use U.S. missiles on Russian territory. So Ukrainian officials have launched a new push to pressure the U.S. into allowing U.S.-provided missile systems to be used in attacks on Russian territory, which would mark a significant escalation in the proxy war. So there's a delegation of Ukrainian lawmakers who have been in Washington lobbying for the restriction to be lifted in the wake of Russia's Kharkiv offensive, which was launched from Russia's Belgorod Oblast. And according to the New York Times, they're also asking for more intelligence on Russian military positions inside Russian territory. So David Arakhamia, a senior Ukrainian MP and the leader of the ruling Servant of the People's Party, he's leading the delegation, and he had some harsh words for the U.S. for not letting them use missiles on Russian territory. He said, quote, "It's like if somebody were to attack Washington, D.C. from the Virginia state, and you say, we're not going to hit Virginia for some reason. It's crazy. Military people, generals, they don't understand, so they are pushing us as politicians to stop this policy. It is insane," end quote. So I saw, as I've been talking about this, Blinken said kind of a very vague statement on this, but I saw the Pentagon actually said on May 16th, which was this past Thursday, that the U.S. has not changed its position that Ukraine should only use U.S.-provided weapons. How she put it was to take back Ukrainian sovereign territory, so saying that they don't want them using these missiles. They're talking about the HIMARS and the ATACMS, because one thing that's important to point out is that they have been using the ATACMS on Crimea, which is Russian territory, obviously, to Russia. But, of course, the U.S. and Ukraine don't recognize it, so it doesn't apply to Crimea. So there's always a risk of escalation with those attacks. But they are saying, the Russian mainland, don't hit them with the missiles. And what we have seen is the neo-Nazi militia, the Russian Volunteer Corps, that attacked Russia, launched these ground raids into Russia, into the Belgorod Oblast from Ukraine. They have been armed with U.S. armored vehicles. So we have seen that, American weapons used in those attacks. But this is more talking about they want to use the missiles to really hit the Russian military positions. All right. So the next one here, Ukraine's latest conscription law stretches workforce. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Ukraine's newest conscription law went into effect on Saturday, raising concerns that the country will be unable to fill critical industrial jobs. The law increases the number of men who can be conscripted and requires all males to take additional registration steps. So the operator of a steel plant in Ukraine explained that there was growing staffing concerns over the new conscription law and that the company had already cut back production. So under the Ukrainian law, men have to register at mobilization offices, and members of the Ukrainian military have also come to this plant in an effort to catch men to send to the front. So apparently they're going down and to these factories and things to try to catch people that haven't registered for the draft. So it'll be curious to see how exactly, I really have no idea how many soldiers they're going to be able to mobilize with this new law. So we'll see. I know they're hoping at least 150,000, and they want the NATO to come train them inside Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes in Syria kill at least 6. This article is from Jason Ditz. So according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in the UK, a pair of Israeli airstrikes against Syria in the area of Homs were carried out on Monday, killing at least 6 pro-Iran fighters and wounding a number of others. A headquarters building and a vehicle were targeted in the 2 missile strikes. The casualties were identified as non-Syrians, but Hezbollah reported only one of their fighters killed. So usually when they say pro-Iran fighters, that usually means the Iraqi Shia militias that operate in Syria. So Hezbollah said one of their guys was killed. So Israel has been kind of regularly bombing Syria again after the bombing of the Iranian consulate. There was kind of a long lull, but now it seems like they're back at it. And the next one here, Israeli strikes kill at least 5 in southern Lebanon. This is another one from Jason. So Israel carried out a series of strikes across southern Lebanon on Monday, killing at least 5 people and wounding a number of others. So these escalations across the border continue, and we've seen more threats from Israeli officials about an invasion into southern Lebanon. So always that risk there of things really escalating. All right, so the next one here, the other big news was that shortly after my show posted yesterday, Iran confirmed that their president, Ebrahim Raisi, was killed in the helicopter crash, and along with Iran's foreign minister. And of course, Republican Iran hawks are celebrating his death. So some Republicans in Congress are celebrating the death of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, who was killed in a helicopter crash along with Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollah Ahyan and 7 others in Iran's mountainous East Azerbaijan province. When the news first broke that Raisi was missing, Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, wrote on X, quote, "If Raisi is dead, the world is now a safer and better place. That evil man was a tyrant and terrorist. He was not loved or respected, and he will be missed by no one." End quote. So after Raisi's death was confirmed, the State Department offered condolences to Iran, which outraged Scott. So he said in response to that, quote, "What a disgrace. Since when does the U.S. issue a statement of condolence for a terrorist? It should read, the world is a better place with Raisi dead," end quote. So Representative Mike Waltz, another Republican from Florida, made similar comments in response to the news about Raisi. He said, quote, "Good riddance. Raisi was a murderous human rights abuser before and during his presidency," end quote. Senator Marco Rubio, another Republican from Florida, we're seeing a pattern here. He released a statement where he called Raisi one of Iran's bloodiest hardliners. So far, Iranian authorities have not offered much detail about the crash, but said that it was caused by a technical failure. Raisi was traveling in a U.S.-made Bell 212 helicopter. According to the Washington Post, the average age of Iran's Bell 212 helicopters is 35 years old, and they are difficult for the Islamic Republic to maintain due to U.S. sanctions. So State Department spokesman Matt Miller, he was asked about the aircraft-related sanctions that the U.S. has imposed on Iran, and he said that they would not apologize for those sanctions. He said, quote, "We are not going to apologize for our sanctions regime at all. The Iranian government has used its aircraft to transport equipment to support terrorism. So we will continue to fully enforce our sanctions regime, including our sanctions regime on aircraft for use by the Iranian government," end quote. So Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he has confirmed that Vice President Mohammad Mokhber is now Iran's acting president, and he said that per the Iranian constitution, he has 50 days to arrange for new elections. So as far as it looks right now, to me, it seems like it was an accident. You had an old helicopter flying in a mountainous area where there was bad weather and fog, and helicopter crashes happen. We do always have to keep in the back of our mind, as I mentioned yesterday, Israel does have a history of assassinations and sabotage attacks inside Iran. They've killed scientists. They've killed members of the IRGC. They've planted bombs in nuclear facilities. They've carried out little drone attacks. So they've done a lot. So keep that in mind. But right now, there's not really any evidence of that. And again, you have the Iranian state media reporting that it was a technical failure. So we'll see if anything comes out about it. It is, out of considering everything that's going on right now with Iran, with Israel, the timing is definitely a little suspect. But as far as I understand it, right now, seems like accident is what Iran is saying. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to withdraw from Niger by September 15th. So here's some good news. The U.S. Troops that have been ordered to leave Niger will complete the withdrawal by mid-September under an agreement reached in talks between U.S. and Nigerian officials. So the Pentagon actually released a joint statement with Niger's defense ministry that said the two nations have reached a disengagement agreement, that U.S. forces will complete the withdrawal by September 15th. And they agreed that for the U.S. troops will be safe in the meantime. U.S. officials told AP that some military personnel and equipment have already been pulled out of Niger and that there are fewer than 1,000 U.S. troops left in the country. So the U.S. really dragged its feet trying to figure out a way to stay in Niger, but it looks like ultimately they have failed at that and that they are going to go through with the withdrawal. So we'll see what happens over the next, 4 months. Hopefully they complete it in a timely manner, and that is that. Of course, the U.S. does not want to give up its big drone base that's in Niger. They're probably going to just reposition these troops elsewhere in Africa. But, we had that whistleblower come out and say that these U.S. troops were basically in harm's way as long as the U.S. refused to leave Niger. So now they're pulling them out. There's less than 1,000 U.S. troops in the country now. All right, so the last story here, Taiwan's new leader, William Lai, takes the helm. So this is from the South China Morning Post. So Taiwan's president was inaugurated on Monday, and Beijing slammed Taiwanese leader William Lai Ching-te's inauguration speech on Monday as sending dangerous signals, saying that it would never tolerate any form of Taiwan independence separatist activities. So Lai, who was sworn in as the island's new president, along Vice President Sao Bi Kim, delivered a speech that was tougher than that of his predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen, who is also from the independence-leaning Democratic Progressive Party. Observers say that Lai's stance could lead to more tensions across the Taiwan Strait, even though Beijing, which has branded Lai as a separatist and troublemaker, has low expectations for his administration. So Lai's inauguration marked an unprecedented third term for the DPP. However, unlike Tsai, when she became president in 2016, Lai made no mention of the 1992 consensus in his address. The consensus is a tacit agreement between Beijing and Taipei that there is one China, but each side of the Taiwan Strait can have its own interpretation of what constitutes China. And as far as I understand, the 1992 consensus is that it's actually not really a consensus. The Kuomintang, the main opposition party, which was, the ruling party, which was the nationalists who had a dictatorship in Taiwan until the 1980s. They interpreted it as the two sides agree that there's one China, but they're open to two different interpretations. But then I think China, Beijing says something else, about it. But essentially it is what established, the potential for unofficial dialogue and relations between the two sides of the strait. The DPP has always kind of opposed it, but Tsai Ing-wen, who's the current president, did mention it in her inauguration in 2016. So William Lai not mentioning it is a signal. And he said that Beijing had to face the reality of the Republic of China's existence, which is Taiwan's official name, and that they can't subordinate Taiwan. And Lai said, quote, "All of the people of Taiwan must come together to safeguard our nation. All our political parties ought to oppose annexation and protect sovereignty, and no one should entertain the idea of giving up our national sovereignty in exchange for political power," end quote. He also called for Beijing to cease military intimidation. So, of course, Lai is going to continue the policy of increasing military ties with the U.S., which China is very unhappy about how that has progressed, and not just military ties, but diplomatic ties as well, adding to the tensions. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. One from Judge Napolitano, free speech for me, but not for thee. One from Ron Paul, the Vietnamization of Ukraine. One from Neil DeMaus, on campus, Gaza protests, media let police tell the story even when they're wrong. One from John Kuriakow, the heroism of David McBride. One from Megan K. Stack, the hardening of the Israeli psyche. So that is everything. Again, I want to thank everybody for helping us with the fundraiser. We were able to wrap that up. Follow us on X. Follow me on there. Subscribe to this show on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, wherever you watch. Leave a review or a rating if you listen to the podcast. Follow us on Instagram. But that's it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.